The unassuming brick home at 30 East Drive, Pontefract, England appears to be just an average family home. However, average couldn't be farther from the truth. The brick house on that quiet English lane is home to one of the most violent poltergeist cases in history. In 1966, the Pritchard family happened upon the home and, believing they found the perfect place for their young family, excitedly moved in, but it wouldn't take long for reality to betray them. The town of Pontefract once had a gallows erected at a crossroad, which was customary at that time. This practice was thought to confuse the ghostly spirit of those executed and buried there, so that they could not find their way back and return to the place of their crime to haunt it. The site of Pontefract's old gallows, it later transpired, was right where number 30 East Drive now stands. It all began on an ordinary June morning for the Pritchard family. That Thursday was warm and summery, and the family were all at home in the back garden enjoying the sunshine. Joe Pritchard, his wife Jean, and their two children, Philip, aged 15, and Diane, aged 13, were sunbathing, while grandmother, Sarah Scholes, had gone indoors out of the sun and was sitting in the lounge happily knitting a cardigan. It was the family in the garden who noticed an odd tapping noise coming from inside the house. Now, in the beginning, they just tried to ignore it. However, after a while, Joe sent young Philip to investigate. Philip, trying to follow the noise, wandered in through the kitchen and entered the lounge, where he met the strangest sight. Sarah, his grandmother, was sitting, minding her business, knitting away, blissfully unaware that she was surrounded by a gray-white powder in the air. The mystery substance was raining gently down on her. She had been so absorbed in her knitting that she hadn't noticed the powder shower until Philip walked in and made her look up. There was no explanation for the powder-like substance. It wasn't coming down from the ceiling, nor up from the floor. However, just materializing all around her, falling like snow. When Grandmother Sarah went to the kitchen to get a broom in order to clean up the mystery mess, she found the floor covered in large pools of water. She called her daughter Jean in, and together they mopped up the water, only to find that it kept reappearing. They got Joe and Philip to pull up the linoleum flooring, thinking the water was coming up through the bottom, only to find the concrete subfloor was dry as a bone. All while the mysterious tapping continued. Joe returned to the back garden to turn off the water stopcock, noticing as he did so that his daughter Diane was taking absolutely no interest in the quite unusual proceedings going on all around her. It was as if she hadn't even noticed. For the rest of the day, pools of water kept mysteriously appearing in the kitchen, and the tapping noises grew louder. Joe and Philip spent most of the night trying to track down the tapping sounds, but they always seemed to come from the next room or somewhere else untraceable. The next morning, Jean contacted the local water authority, who spent some time inspecting drains and checking for broken pipes, but all to no avail. Eventually, they offered the rather lame excuse that it must be condensation and left in a bit of a hurry. Over the next few weeks, things became almost unbearable for the Pritchard family. Apart from the tapping noises, which were now occurring mainly at night as to cause sleep loss, objects started to move around the rooms. Ornaments, flower pots, eggs, and even cups of tea would disappear and be found later somewhere completely different. More disturbing still, strange things started appearing. At first, it was small stones or pebbles raining down from the kitchen ceiling. Now, this is a well-known and documented poltergeist phenomena. However, one day while Jane was cleaning out the kitchen grate, a multitude of old keys rattled down the chimney, some hitting her on the head. The collection included every key in the house, but also a number of very old keys that no one had ever seen before. From then on, the haunting increased to include crockery and potted plants being broken, and an increase in the tapping noise until a crack appeared in the bedroom ceiling. Electric lights switched themselves on and off at the wall and at the main switchboard that was located inside of a locked cupboard. Then one night, as the vicar who had come to visit to offer spiritual comfort and guidance was leaving, the family's prized grandfather clock just fell from the landing and smashed to pieces on the floor by the vicar's feet. Now, the vicar promised to return, but he never did. Much of this activity had been witnessed by policemen, newspapermen, the local member of parliament, and several priests, all of whom advised the Pritchards to leave the house at once. But the Pritchards are of stubborn Yorkshire stock and steadfastly refused, vowing to stay and beat this thing. One day, however, everything changed while Jean was standing at the sink peeling potatoes. Suddenly, she recounted later, that, quote, "The hair on the back of my neck began to stand up and I knew that there was someone or something standing behind me," unquote. She turned around and found herself looking at a very tall figure dressed in a black monk's habit with a cowl covering his face. The figure looked quite solid, and oddly enough, she felt no alarm or fear. Then the monk just vanished before her eyes, seemingly sinking into the floor. After this, the family saw the monk on numerous occasions, which prompted them to look up old records in the library, and what they discovered was quite interesting. It was revealed that way back in the reign of Henry VIII, a monk had been hanged on the gallows that once stood where number 30 now did. The monk had been found guilty and later executed for the rape and murder of a young girl, with his body being disposed in a deep well, which, coincidentally, is located under the kitchen floor of the Pritchard home. So the conclusion was that the tormented spirit of the monk, dubbed the Black Monk of Pontefract, was still wandering the earth on the site of his death. The last serious incident in the case occurred soon after and seemed to confirm everything that had been discovered about the Black Monk from his records. Late one evening, as young Diane was going to bed, the lights went out all over the house, and then suddenly the girl's screams filled the darkness. When the family ran to her assistance, in the beam of a flashlight, they saw an incredible sight. Diane was being dragged up the stairs by an invisible force. Her cardigan was being stretched out in front of her as if being pulled by a strong yet unseen hand. She also, it seemed, was being held by the throat as her screams soon turned to choking gasps. Her father, mother, and brother grabbed hold of her and began pulling her, and after a considerable struggle, all four of them fell back down the stairs as the invisible force gave up. Diane had bright red marks, which would later turn to severe bruises on her throat in the strangle position. Once they had pulled themselves together and revived Diane with a large glass of brandy, the family decided enough was enough and moved out of the house to stay with relatives. Periodically returning to the home for various things, it seemed that the paranormal activity had stopped completely. Now we would conjecture that young Diane was the focus of the Black Monk. And now with her being away, the spirit no longer had its energy source to pull from. Eventually, the Pritchard family did return home. They repaired the crack in the ceiling from where the tapping had become so excessive that it caused damage. They mowed the lawn and trimmed the hedges and just tried to get on with life. In the case of the Black Monk, there were multiple very sensible people who witnessed various forms of activity, so there really was no denying that something strange was indeed going on. Today, the house is a popular site for visitors who hope to experience some fashion of paranormal activity.